Her father gave her to an Apache because she was ugly and fat, but he loved her like no other man. It began with dust and insult. The sun was sinking hard behind the broken hills of West Texas when Annie Mae's father shoved her from the wagon with the grace of a man tossing out trash. She fell hard, thick arms flailing, her chin striking a rock, the weight of her dress pinning her down. "Get up," he said flatly, eyes never meeting hers. She tried, struggled, but her ankle had twisted, and tears sprang without permission. Behind her the wagon creaked. The mules stomped. Her younger sister peeked out from the canvas, blue-eyed and smooth-skinned, the child everyone cooed over in town. Annie wasn't like that. Never had been. She was 16, built wide and solid like her grandmother, with a face men called plain and a stomach that made dresses fit wrong. Her hair wouldn't lie flat, her teeth weren't perfect, and her voice had a tremble she couldn't shake. People laughed at it sometimes. They didn't mean harm, they said. They always said that. Her father didn't look back as he drove off. "Consider it done," he muttered, eyes on the horizon. One less mouth. The man waiting was no white man. He stood beside a paint horse, bare-chested beneath a woven vest, black braids falling over his shoulders. He was young, not much older than Annie, but his stillness made him seem older. Eyes like riverstone, a calm that scared her more than shouting ever could. He said nothing as she cried, didn't reach for her, didn't spit, didn't leer like the men in the town sometimes did when they saw her alone. He simply waited. She wiped her face, hobbled to her feet, and whispered, "I'm not what you wanted." He blinked slowly once, and then he said, "I didn't ask for anything." 3 days passed. They didn't speak much. The man, his name was Tahoma, rode ahead, silent in the saddle. Annie rode behind him on a smaller horse. Her legs ached. Her thighs chafed. Her boots weren't broken in for this kind of travel. At night he built the fire and gave her the better blanket. She tried not to eat too much, even though she was always hungry. She didn't want to be a burden. On the 4th night she finally asked, "Why did you take me?" His eyes reflected the firelight. "You looked like you needed someone." By the end of the week, her silence was softer. She began humming when they rode, not to entertain, just to fill the space. One morning she laughed, really laughed, when Tahoma's horse farted so loud it scared a flock of birds from the trees. He didn't laugh, but he smiled, barely. That smile stuck with her longer than it should have. He taught her to track rabbits, to read scat, to cook cactus. She fumbled, burned her hands, got thorns in her palms. He didn't tease. He just said, "Try again." The next month tested everything. They ran into settlers outside Pecos, men with whiskey breath and too much time. "She yours?" one man sneered. "Sure ain't much to look at." Tama's hand hovered over his knife. Annie stepped forward before he could draw it. "She's her own," she said, heart pounding. "And she don't need your opinion." The men laughed, but they left. Tama didn't speak until that night. And when he did, he looked at her like he saw her for the first time. "Do you know what kind of bravery that was?" She shook her head, still shaking inside. "The kind that matters." That night, something shifted. The fire crackled between them. Annie was picking at the calluses on her hands when she finally asked what had haunted her for weeks. "Did you really want me?" Tama looked up. "No." The truth stung more than a lie would have. "But I never wanted anyone like that," he added. His voice was quiet, like leaves brushing stone. "White men trade people like horses, but I watched you. You don't look down. Even when people try to make you feel small, you stay standing. I respect that." She blinked. No one had ever told her she had worth. Not like that. Not outside of a joke or a whisper behind a hand. A storm hit 2 days later. They found shelter in a rocky overhang, wind shrieking past the canyon like a ghost in mourning. Annie huddled against the stone, hair soaked, skirt plastered to her legs. She was shivering violently. Without a word, Tahoma pulled off his vest and wrapped it around her shoulders. Then he crouched beside her, close but not touching. "I'm not small," she muttered, teeth chattering. "I know. I'm not pretty. You're honest. I'm not enough." His eyes met hers in the dim light. "You're real. That's more than most." By morning the wind had died. So had something else. Her self-hatred. It didn't vanish. but it shrank like smoke on a still day. Something about the way he looked at her, never flinching, never disgusted. She watched him skin a rabbit with steady hands and thought, maybe being chosen by someone who doesn't lie is better than being adored by liars. Weeks passed. The world turned. They crossed canyons and dried riverbeds, slept under stars. Once they watched a meteor burn across the sky like a falling god. Annie gasped aloud. "Never seen that before," she whispered. "Then I'm glad I was here for your first time," he said. Her cheeks flushed, not from the cold. In the town of Little Thorn, trouble found them again. They needed salt and bullets. Annie had coins hidden in her dress lining, her mother's last kindness before she died. But when they entered the general store, the woman behind the counter frowned. "No Injuns in here." Tom said nothing. He turned to leave, but Annie stood her ground. "He's with me," she said. The woman's lip curled. "Then you get out too, pig." That word. That damn word. It froze Annie for half a second. But only a second. She turned, snatched a tin of salt and a box of cartridges from the shelf, slammed down double their worth in coins and said, "We're paying. So unless you want to be the woman who turned down honest money because her pride outweighed her sense, I suggest you mind your mouth." The woman gawked. Annie walked out, heart hammering. Tawnaw followed, silent. Halfway down the street, he spoke. "You could have left me." "I've been left enough," Annie said. "I'm done doing it to others." That night they made camp near a grove of mesquite trees. She was quieter than usual, so was he. But the silence wasn't awkward. It was full, like a pot left to simmer, flavor deepening with time. When he finally reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. It was rough, weathered, honest, like everything else about him. The next morning, she found him whittling something. It was a small carved animal, somewhere between a bear and a dog. He handed it to her without a word. "For luck?" she asked. He shrugged. "Looks like me," she joked. Short, round, misunderstood. Tawnaw gave her a look she'd never seen before, like he saw something break in her, and he wanted to hold it together with his own hands. "You're none of those things," he said. "You're strong, kind, and more beautiful than any carving could show." Her throat tightened. She looked away, but her fingers curled around the carving like it was gold. By the next week, she started to believe him. They met a band of Chiricahua riders near the border. Tahoma spoke with them in low tones, exchanged gestures, words Annie didn't understand. But one woman, older, wrapped in eagle feathers, came to Annie and studied her face. "You were not loved where you were born," the elder said. Annie flinched. "But that is the soil, not the seed." The woman placed a stone in her hand. It was smooth, veined with red. "Carry this. It remembers pain, but makes it shine." That night she held the stone in her palm like a secret. The grooves felt like rivers, scars maybe, trails of what had been lost. She thought of her father's eyes, empty and patient, of the way her sister never looked back, of the sting in her stomach that used to come every time someone used the word fat like it was a crime. And then she looked across the fire. Tawnaw was gutting a fish, hands slick but practiced. Not once had he commented on her size or her looks. Not once had he tried to change her, only asked her to try. She turned the stone over. Maybe that's what love really was. By the third month, they stopped riding separately. She rode behind him now, arms around his waist, her cheek resting against his back. The horse responded smoother, easier that way, like it sensed they had found balance. She began wearing her hair differently, braided down her back. The older Chiricahua woman had shown her how. "You walk like someone who has learned their own shape," the woman had said. Annie hadn't known what that meant until Tahoma looked at her one morning and simply said, "You're glowing." She didn't argue. She just smiled. Then came the day she met her reflection. Not a mirror, just a still pond. She knelt by the edge, cupped water in her hands, then paused. The face looking back at her wasn't thinner, wasn't airbrushed or polished, but it was awake, alive. There was something in her eyes she'd never seen before. A steadiness, a fire. She whispered, "You're not the same girl." And for once the girl in the water didn't flinch. Trouble came on a stolen horse. A young white boy, 15 maybe, galloped into their camp near dawn. His face was bloodied, shirt torn. He barely made it off the saddle before collapsing. Annie and Tahoma ran to him. He was muttering something about outlaws, a raid, a girl taken, a town burning. Tama stood, jaw tight. Where? The boy pointed. Dry Creek, South Ridge. Annie touched his shoulder. It's suicide. I know. I'm going with you. He turned. No. She didn't flinch. I didn't ride this far just to watch you die alone. The ride to Dry Creek was brutal. Wind against their faces. Buzzards circling above. Smoke rising in the distance like a warning finger from hell. They found 3 men ransacking the town chapel, rifles slung loose, laughter cruel. Tanab didn't hesitate. Neither did Annie. She threw the first rock. It hit one of the men in the jaw. He staggered, swore. Tanab moved like thunder, fast, decisive. One man went down with a grunt. Another dropped his gun and ran. Annie found herself standing over the third, a broken shovel in her hand, breathing harder than she ever had. She didn't remember picking it up. Afterward, people stared at her differently. Not because she was fat or ugly, but because she had stood her ground. Who are you? A woman asked, jaw slack. Annie wiped blood from her cheek and said, someone who finally knows. That night Tahoma kissed her. Not in a rush, not like a prize won, but like a man laying down a truth he'd carried too long. His lips were dry, gentle, and when she opened her eyes he whispered, you are not a burden. She touched his face. You are not a mistake. And for the first time in both their lives, they believed it. But peace never lingers long in the West. 2 weeks later, a rider from Fort Garland found them by the river. You're the girl they gave to the Apache, right? He asked Annie. She stiffened. Tanab stepped forward, tense. The rider held up a note. A bounty. Seems your daddy's changed his mind. Told the marshal you were kidnapped. Wants you back. Annie felt her stomach churn. Why? The rider shrugged. He didn't say, but he offered land in exchange. Land, of course. Not love, never love. They had 3 days to decide. If they ran, they'd be hunted. If they stayed, they'd be captured. Annie stared into the flames that night, the old hurt rising again. Not because her father wanted her back, but because she didn't care anymore. Tanab touched her hand. I'll go wherever you want. She shook her head. We won't run. Then what? We build, we fight, and we make them see you can't trade people like cattle. He nodded. And if they come? We give them a welcome they'll never forget. The morning the marshals arrived, Annie was ready. She stood tall, braids tight, shoulders straight, rifle slung over one arm. They came with 2 wagons and a false warrant. This land belongs to the U.S. government. One barked. That man's a savage. And you, girl, you are under custody. Annie stepped forward. I am not a girl, I'm a woman, and I belong to no one. They reached for her. Tana stepped between them. The first shot missed. The second did not. The bullet grazed Annie's shoulder, but she didn't fall. She fired once, twice. They fled. The fire in her eyes didn't. For 3 days, Annie didn't rest. The wound wasn't deep, but it burned, more from memory than blood. She wrapped it herself, tight and clean, and refused to let Tahoma treat her like she was broken. I've been broken, she said. This isn't it. The marshals didn't return, but rumors did. Townfolk started whispering about the fat girl who shot a lawman, about the Apache man who stood beside her like stone. They called her a witch, a rebel, a savage's whore. But some called her something else, a woman who finally said no. Annie didn't want revenge. She wanted something better. They took the old barn outside of Dry Creek, half burnt, blackened at the rafters, and turned it into something new. A school, a refuge, for girls with scars, for boys who cried, for people who didn't fit into the tidy boxes society carved. The first child who arrived was a half-blind girl with a cleft lip. The second was a boy with burns down his back from his father's whiskey rage. Annie greeted each with the same line. You are not ruined. You are growing. Tama added something else. This place is yours now." By spring, they had 17 children. They planted corn and squash, raised chickens, sang in the mornings. At night, Annie read stories under lamplight, her voice no longer trembling, and slowly, her world filled with voices that didn't mock, but asked questions. "Why did your father give you away?" "Because he didn't see me." "Did it hurt?" "Once, but not anymore." "Why not?" Annie would smile. "Because someone finally did." Then one morning, her father came. She saw him from the porch, slouched in a wagon, hat in hand. He looked smaller, not older, just dimmer. The children froze. Tehama stepped out of the barn, axe in hand. Annie stood. "Let me," she said. Her boots crushed gravel as she walked toward the man who had once sold her for peace of mind. He didn't rise. "Annie," he said. She didn't answer. "I didn't know what else to do. You could have loved me. I didn't know how." Annie let the silence hang like a noose. "I'm not here for apologies," she said. "I'm here to tell you this place is mine now, and no one gets traded again." He opened his mouth, closed it, and drove away. She didn't cry. She went inside. The stew was boiling. The next year bloomed with color. Annie was heavier than ever, stronger too. Her arms could lift sacks of flour with ease. Her laughter came louder. She sang more often. Tana had built her a bench near the cottonwood tree where they'd first carved their initials. "I used to hide from mirrors," she told one of the new girls. "Now I make them." She taught them how to stitch, how to speak up, how to aim true. Tana taught them how to listen to the wind. And then one spring day she gave birth. A girl, round-faced, dark-eyed, full of lungs. "She's got your stubbornness," Tehama said, kissing her forehead. "And your silence." Annie smiled, but the baby screamed all night, wild, fierce. They named her Solana, sunlight after storm. Annie held her tight and whispered, "You'll never have to earn love." 3 years passed. More children came. Some stayed for seasons. Some stayed for life. A woman from the east offered to help expand the school. A black freedman with a gift for numbers began teaching math. The town of Dry Creek slowly shifted, drawn by the harvests, the music, the strength of a woman who had once been discarded. Annie never forgot what had been taken, but she no longer let it define her. One evening, just before dusk, she sat under the cottonwood. Solana was climbing rocks nearby. Tehama was sharpening blades for winter prep. Annie turned to the older children gathered around. Once a girl was given away because her father thought she was too big, too loud, too much. They waited. She wandered. She cried. She doubted. But then someone saw her. "Who?" a little boy asked. She smiled. Herself first, then him. She looked at Tehama. He didn't say a word, but his eyes held everything. And that night, Annie carved something new into the tree. A wide circle, with a line down the center, 2 halves, whole together. Under it, she wrote, not because of how she looked, but because of how she loved. The children watched. Some didn't understand, but one day they would. The letter arrived folded in grief. Annie read it in the early morning quiet, Solana asleep on her lap. Her sister Anne was dying. Annie hadn't seen her since the day she was thrown from the wagon. She remembered Anne's blue eyes peeking through the canvas, filled with silence, not shame. Now those same eyes, the letter said, were closing for good. Consumption had taken root. The family home was withering. No one else to tend it. No one else left. Anne had written only one sentence herself, scrawled at the bottom in crooked ink. "Please come, I remember." Annie sat still for a long time, then folded the letter and stood. "I have to go," she told Tehama. He didn't ask why. He just packed her things. The road back to that town felt haunted, not with ghosts but with weight. Each building she passed whispered things she thought she'd buried. "You'd be so pretty if you lost a little. No man wants a mule. You're lucky someone took you at all." Annie didn't flinch. She wore her long coat, her hair braided thick, her chin high. A woman who had survived being sold, and then built something sacred from the wreckage. The town had shrunk. Dry wells, faded paint, hollowed eyes. She walked past the church, the old bakery, the dressmaker's shop that once laughed her out the door. Now she walked in. The same seamstress blinked up from her needlework. "Annie Mae?" Annie smiled softly. "I go by Annie Whitehorse now." The woman stood slowly. "I didn't know you were alive, thriving, loved." Annie's tone held no venom, only clarity. "I know," the seamstress stammered. "We were just young." Annie didn't correct her. Some debts time couldn't repay. Only truth could. Anne was in the back room of the family home. The same bed their mother had died in, same cracked window, same smell of dust and lilacs. Her skin was paper thin, her hair like cobwebs, but her eyes still blue, still quiet. Annie sat beside her. Anne smiled faintly. "You look strong." "I am. I'm sorry I didn't say anything that day. You were a child." Anne nodded. "I kept that carving you made," she whispered. "The bird from the old apple tree. It stayed by my window." Annie swallowed. "Why did you ask me here?" Anne turned slowly. "Because I'm dying, and you're not." Silence. "I wanted you to see that even the ones who are kept can feel caged." Annie reached forward, took her hand, and held it until the end. She stayed long enough to bury Anne beside their mother. No priest, just the wind and a handful of dirt. Then she walked to the courthouse, not for vengeance, for clarity. The judge looked startled to see her. "So you were sold?" Annie met his eyes. "Yes, I was, and you all let it happen." People murmured. The room had filled with townsfolk, some from curiosity, some from guilt. "Why come back now?" the judge asked. Annie stepped forward. "To say this, I was never the shame. You were." The room went still. "I was the truth you didn't want to see. A girl who couldn't be shaped to your liking. So you threw me to the wind and called it fate." The judge cleared his throat. "Do you want restitution?" "No." "Then what?" She held her head high. "A monument, in the square, for every girl you tried to disappear." He blinked. "That's not how things work." "Then change how they work." They did. It took months. But Annie stayed long enough to see the stone set in the square. A carving of a woman with wide hips and strong arms, holding a child and a book. Behind her a tree. At the bottom it read, "She was not small, she was not quiet, but she was good, and she was enough." Annie didn't speak at the unveiling. She just stood beside the statue and left a stone red vein smooth as tribute. 10 years later, Solana stood before a group of children. She wore a blue shawl like her mother once had. Her voice rang strong and warm. "Once there was a girl who was too big, too loud, too ugly for her world." A child raised a hand. "What happened to her?" Solana smiled. "She built a new world, one where no one had to fit to be worthy." She tapped a wooden carving. A circle split in half. "And now we live in it." She opened a small chest and handed out slips of paper. "Write what someone said you'd never be, then burn it. Let the smoke carry the lie away." As they wrote, the wind stirred golden leaves from the cottonwood trees. Far on the hill, a woman with silver-streaked hair watched. Her hands were lined with time, her back bent from work. But her eyes were clear. She saw Solana, the school, the fire, and her heart said, "You were given away, so you could be found." Annie turned from the hill, the red stone tucked in her palm, and for the first time in her life, she whispered, not with pain, but with power, "I was never too much. They were just too little."